Hi, I'm Sandy Barker. Welcome back to Rush Podcast. We are super excited to be filming this next episode in Washington, D.C. as Gold Rush Cure Foundation continues our advocacy work here. Speaking of advocacy work, advocacy, research, and clinical trials are how we cure our young heroes fighting cancer. Through research funding, pharmaceutical development, government research, and data collection, we can make a difference in the lives of these young heroes fighting cancer by giving them access to more effective and less toxic treatments while also working on new therapies and treatments for kids who aren't even diagnosed yet. We know that so many of you have questions about advocacy, about you just wondering if you can make a difference, what to do, how this works, and some stuff that may seem a little intimidating at first. I'm here with a wonderful guest who's going to give us some critical information and help guide you to joining this fight. So I'd like to introduce Sarah Milberg, who is the Director of Government Relations and Advocacy at St. Baldricks Foundation. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really thrilled to join you.
I'm excited. So much respect for St. Baldricks. I mean, and just the work you've done. You've done so much. How long have you been there?
So I've been with St. Baldricks coming up on 3 years.
Wow.
I started right before kind of the world shut down. So January 2020 was when I officially joined. But it wasn't my first foray into childhood cancer, just my first with St. Baldricks. So it's been good to be here.
Okay, well, I want to hear about that too. But I want you to know, like, I'm thankful that you're here, but knowing some of the work you've done, I want to thank you for the work you have already done and the work that you're working on and the work to be done, because it's a lot sometimes. I mean, sometimes this is a lot. I mean, it's a marathon, as we continue this trying to get more funding.
It really is. And I find for me, there's like the short-term victories we all can celebrate, and then the long-term goals we're all striving for, and finding ways in the in-between to keep motivated and to keep going. Like, that's how I try to function day to day, just because so much of advocacy can feel like you're kind of beating your head up against a brick wall, but slowly over time it starts to crumble. And so we keep trying. Yeah.
And we have to. Everybody who's involved, we just have to keep doing it. So we're going to start on your story, and but I want to know how did you get into this? Who influenced you the most? Was it a child? Was it that you knew personally? Is it a story? Who encourages you? Is in that aspect on the days that you don't always have the victories.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of came at this a little bit backwards in some ways. So when I was fresh out of college, I was very much bitten by the political bug. Worked on Capitol Hill for a few years, worked on a campaign, loved it. The member of Congress I worked for lost re-election in 2012, and I was faced with a bit of a crossroads of what do I do now? And that's when patient advocacy, nonprofit work really started to speak to me. And it was shortly after I left Capitol Hill that I met my husband. My husband at the time was just getting to his 2-year cancer-free mark.
Aww.
So he was a senior in college when he was diagnosed with cancer, and is doing very well now. And so it was always kind of in the back of my mind, okay, he's lived through some stuff, and there's a lot that as a couple we navigate because of that he personally navigates because of that. And so as I kind of, made my way through patient advocacy with a couple other nonprofits, I found my way into kind of the cancer world. And so before I was with St. Baldricks, I was with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. I actually lost a grandparent to a blood cancer. So that's what kind of led me there as one of their lobbyists. And through that work, I was able to be part of the Alliance for Childhood Cancer, to get connected better with this community. And when the opportunity at St. Baldricks came up, it kind of was all the stars aligning of, the personal, the professional, all kind of coming together. And I love it.
That's exciting. So circling back with your husband, so was he 21 or?
He was 22. Mm-hmm.
22. Okay,
yeah.
So that's almost, some people don't know. They think childhood cancer is just children, young children. Mm-hmm. And children are treated from birth to often 22, sometimes even older, depending on what type they have. But it's not just for the little children. I mean, Christian was diagnosed the day after his 13th birthday, but they're treated up until, older. So it's I don't know. It like I said, it depends on the type, but, he could have been treated on. So that's why it's so important to, get the funding and move forward with everything.
No, absolutely. And in the case of my husband, Evan, he had an adult cancer as a young adult.
Mm-hmm.
So, he was the youngest one in his cancer ward by like a solid 30, 40 years. And every time he went in for chemo, and it's different than, truly pediatric patients who are in children's hospitals and maybe inpatient, things like that. And there are other challenges, too, that the, adolescent young adult population
mm-hmm.
faces, other social challenges that
Yep.
come with that. So in his case, I'm grateful that he was still in college, was close to home, was able to get treated quickly and effectively. But there are a whole host of other things of how do you navigate grad school after that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get your first job? How do you navigate relationships with people? And so definitely a different realm of this, but, incredibly important too.
Well, and he, because of his age, he kind of fell in that category where he was kind of between both. Yeah,
No, he really was. And so it's a little bit of a void, and especially in his survivorship care, I've noticed personally, and being a little too informed in this, I think, of, once he hit his 5 years cancer-free, that was it for him. Yep. And so he's just out in the world.
Isn't that crazy?
It's wild.
Yeah.
And he's doing wonderfully, which is great. I mean, I'm certainly very grateful for that, and our 3-year-old is too. But, there are things where, it kind of makes me wonder, like, 10 years from now, something could come up, and, how does he navigate that? And that's a whole other kind of can of worms.
Yeah, survivability is a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why there's so much, so many bills that, we try and get passed,
mm-hmm.
because especially with pediatric cancer, there's so many different, the kinds of chemo they get, and radiation and everything else. Most children do have, late effects of that kind of thing. So
mm-hmm.
it's not just getting them to where, okay, you're cancer free, bye. Or even 5 years, bye. No, I mean, they've got, issues with, lots of cardiac issues, lots
mm-hmm.
of, that kind of thing. So that's always been on our heart is trying to make sure that these kids are going to be able to have the medical treatment they need
mm-hmm.
even later, once they're a survivor for 10 years, 15, 20 years.
Exactly. And I think especially with the childhood cancer population in particular, if you're 70 and have cancer, 5 years survivability is wonderful, mm-hmm. gets you to 75, mm-hmm. that's great. When you're 5, 10 mm-hmm.
is
just not cutting it.
No.
And I don't think anybody would say that that's acceptable. And so when we talk about, 5-year survivor rates, that's not adequate at all for kids, adolescents, young adults dealing with a cancer diagnosis. And also, too, the long-term challenges from such toxic treatments, mm-hmm. that's a huge impact for mm-hmm. a lifetime. So it's definitely a big passion of mine of how do we think about that in a very specific way so that way all of these kids can live long, healthy lives beyond their diagnosis.
Yeah, and it's vital. So what's your job specifically? And, what does it entail and tell us about the Alliance.
Yeah, absolutely. So my job with St. Baldricks, I'm the Director of Government Relations and Advocacy. We are a team of about 2.5. So it's me. We have a consultant. We also have somebody who shares her time with me and our family relations team. Really wonderful, small but mighty team. And so my job is to be the person that interprets our mission of research and cures into the government space, typically the federal government. And so that means if Congress wants to do something with childhood cancer, I'm your girl, glad to figure it out with you. But it also means that we're often very thoughtful about how do we get more research dollars into the federal pipeline? How do we make sure clinical trials are designed well for kids? How do we make sure that survivorship is a piece of all of this? And that's really where the Alliance for Childhood Cancer comes in as well. So the Alliance formed right around when St. Baldricks did, though independently. It's a coalition right now of 21 national organizations, some patient nonprofits, some professional societies, and we all work together on childhood cancer issues. And St. Baldricks has been co-chair of the Alliance going on almost 10 years now.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Wonderful. And so when I took on this job, I took on that role as well. And it's a really wonderful group. We all come at this from a little bit of a different perspective with the organizations we represent, but our goals are still the same of finding ways to kind of unify our voices so that way together we're going to Capitol Hill with one shared message, with one shared goal to get things done. That's incredible. And it's, we were just talking about before, there's power in numbers. Yeah.
So when you do have, the foundations and individuals collaborating together, it gets the attention. Yeah. Of the people on the Hill.
100%. Yeah, and what's so nice, too, is, it's one thing if me, Sarah, goes to the Hill and says, we need $30 million to implement the Childhood Cancer Star Act. It's another thing if it's me plus 300 advocates plus, 20 other organizations all saying the exact same thing. Suddenly then sticks out a little bit more. And especially when the alternative could be, I say 30 million, someone else says 20, somebody else says 50, somebody else says 75. When we all come in together, there's no question about what we as a collective want. Yeah. And so we can be really consistent in that way and make sure that even if it takes, 10 tries to break through with an office, at least it's the same message every time. So it finally then will resonate.
Yeah. Tell me about what your actual, you're rolling up your sleeves and what your advocacy. So way back, we were just talking about Kathleen Reddy. We love you, Kathleen, by the way. What your advocacy work looks like. You coordinate so much with so many, but when you're like in the trenches, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and the beauty of advocacy work, which I love, is no 2 days are the same ever. And if you think they're going to be, you're sorely mistaken. Something will come up. So even this week alone, leading up to Curefest and with so many things going on. So it was going to, an event on Wednesday night with a bunch of other cancer organizations just to get the word out that childhood cancer should be included, to then having a big briefing on Capitol Hill yesterday where we have, 6 members of Congress coming in, sharing their support for this community. We have so great. Have representatives from the administration and from the National Cancer Institute all there, again, sharing their support. But again, it's a great kind of like pep rally moment in a certain way of getting people excited and getting legislative ideas out there and getting people in the room together. To today, and obviously this will be out a little bit later, but today the White House is holding a childhood cancer forum, and that's another opportunity to share our successes. To then over the weekend sharing legislative opportunities for advocates to participate and to be in touch directly with their members of Congress, things like that. And for me, a lot of it is making sure the messaging is consistent across the board, so that way everyone's empowered to have a great advocacy experience. But also it's a lot of the prep work going into it of making sure our congressional champions are ready to go with good messaging, feel confident in what they're going to speak about, things like that, to identifying who our targets should be in finding new champions for us and people to support the work we're doing. So every day is a little bit different, but it's still exciting.
Different, and it's almost like all these different pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Because everything feeds into your same goal, but all of it has to be done to get to your goal.
100%. And there's an element of you kind of need to lay that like educational foundation with policymakers and also too with advocates of why are we unified around this certain phrasing or this certain dollar amount or this certain bill, and making sure that there's collective buy-in for why this is important in this way. And then it's setting people up for success of, how do you boil down your story into 2 minutes to make it impactful?
Yep, elevator speech.
Oh, yes. And how do you quite literally navigate the halls of Congress and deal with security protocols and, fund tunnels underground and all of that, and making sure people feel great with that. And just giving people opportunities and also making sure, and this is so important to me, that advocates always feel empowered for success in what they're doing, because every advocate that approaches this is doing this as a volunteer because it's important to them. Yeah. And nobody should have a bad experience doing that.
Yeah. So we were at dinner last night and we were talking about advocacy. And we've been there many, many times, but just what you just said, it was almost funny, because you really need somebody to walk you through when you're at the Cannon Building and you have to get to Rayburn, and you instead of going out and going through security again, you need somebody to show you how to get to the basement, because it's kind of a puzzle.
Oh, 100%.
You feel like you're in this, corn maze. It's tricky, but because you just want to, when you're, green and you want to go in and you want to change the world and tell your story and have them say, fine, I'm going to give you $50 million and thank you for coming today. Yeah. Like that's not what happens. But it is nice when you do have somebody to help out, to show you the ropes and
a little
get you through the
Like, it's so funny. Even now, so when I worked on Capitol Hill, I worked for a member of the House of Representatives, and I have plenty of friends who work for the Senate, and I love when we can team up on these, so that way they can show me how to get around the Senate buildings, and I can show them how to get around the House buildings. Because even still, as somebody who's been doing this for a while, it's like you still forget about, the dead ends in Rayburn, and
there's a lot of them
that isn't really a basement, like in the Hart building, and things like that. And just when you think you've figured out some things under construction, you have to learn again.
Who would design stuff that way, by the way?
I would love to know.
It's super confusing. I'm not kidding. You're like, okay, I'm going to go to the end of the hall. And it's a long walk.
Yeah. All on marble and heels.
All marble and heels. But you're like, okay, it goes around because the numbers, that just make sense. Yeah. And then it's a dead end and you have to go all the round. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We've all done that 20 times and we still do it every single time we go.
Yeah.
So with all the great work you do, there's got to be favorite moments where you go to bed that night and you're like, oh, wow, I feel really good. Like it's just, and then you have to have moments where you're like, okay, tomorrow's a new day. Tell us about those.
Yeah, for me, I find, and this is where the pandemic has really been a challenge for me, is I love empowering advocates to have a really good experience. And so the Alliance for Childhood Cancer has...
You want them coming back.
I want them to come back, and I want them to feel that their time in D.C. was worth the while, and that they... for whatever mission they came to support and what they wanted to do, that they accomplished their goal. Because certainly, thinking of St. Baldricks is based in California. Anybody getting on a plane from California to D.C. to talk to Congress, that has to be highly motivated.
That's us.
Right? Yeah. Like, it's not like, you're not just like hopping on a train for an hour. Like, you had to want to be here. And I never want anybody to go home after that feeling like they didn't do the job they came to do. So things like Action Days, which the Alliance hosts every spring, I love that. It's a ton of work going into it to get 300 advocates to DC, get meetings scheduled, get trainings done, things like that. It's quite frankly, it's exhausting to do. And once that Capitol Hill Day is done and seeing people feeling so empowered and accomplished, that's when I go to bed at night being like, okay, I did a good job today. Like, this is what I came to do, and this is beyond me, it's bigger than me, and it's about the entire cause and the entire community, and it feels good to set them up well for that. And so, in the pandemic, we've gone virtual with that opportunity, and it's been wonderful, and also not quite the same magic of being in the room. And so certainly I think going to bed at night after those, still felt very good. I'm hoping in the spring we can bring people back to DC.
I hope so.
I really hope so. We're hoping to make that happen.
Yeah.
And then the frustrating points are, if we're working on a bill or are trying to get funding secured and we'll be, so close to getting it done, and then powers beyond our control will slow us down or will delay us for 3 months, or it's kind of the powers that be in Congress, and just having to kind of stomach it and re-strategize a little bit and figure out what comes next, and just kind of trying to wake up the next day and say, okay, how do we get that energy back again after all the buildup for ultimately nothing?
Yeah, the powers in Congress, the powers that be, and some of those powers that be you want to hug, and some of those powers that be you don't want to hug.
Exactly. Yes.
you don't want to do that, and they're all. I wish we could clone Michael McCall. There's so many different ones that are just. They're in it for the right reasons. Their hearts are beautiful and pure, and there's a lot to name, and then there's some that we'll just leave out, and then we'll end it right there. So. Tell us some of the key updates on the Hill, as far as information, where the cause is, what are our asks right now, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so while September is always super exciting for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, it's also a very critical time on Capitol Hill every year, too. The federal fiscal year, unlike most people's fiscal years, goes from October 1 until September 30th. So right about a week from today we're recording on September 23rd, Congress needs to come up with a way to fund the government by the end of next week, which is always exciting, always a little daunting, and typically there'll be a short-term fix until something long-term is reached in some deal. But that's also a really ripe time for advocacy, because for things like the Childhood Cancer STAR Act or the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative or funding for the National Cancer Institute or National Institutes of Health at large, now is the time to get all of that kind of locked in for the next fiscal year. So that's kind of big goal number one. The other big thing I personally am working on is the Childhood Cancer STAR Act, which the community really rallied around about 4 years ago. I love calling it the most comprehensive childhood cancer bill in history. It does a little bit of everything from survivorship, treatment, access, and research, as the name stands for, and it's been really successful. but it only lasts 5 years. And so we have less than a year left to get STAR reauthorized.
Wow. I can't believe it's been 5 years.
I know, me neither.
We advocated for that. Yeah.
I know, and it's a wonderful bill, and it was unanimously passed by both chambers of Congress, which never happens.
No,
like that never happens. No. And I believe it was 85% of the House co-sponsored it. We had over 60% of the Senate. Like, this was one of the most popular things out there. It was eagerly signed by the president. It's done wonderful things, from biobanking research at NCI to survivorship research for kind of the first time for childhood cancer survivors in particular. It's just totally gone off like gangbusters. It's been wonderful. And so we want that to keep going. And so we're really hoping to get that done this year in particular because funding is so critical to its success. The funding fight for the reauthorized program would start next spring. So if we're successful this year, then we have a little bit more ammo in our toolkit to make sure we can keep the funding going. We've been successful in getting $30 million for STAR every year since it passed. Yeah. And we'd love to keep that going. So that's plausible. It's totally plausible. Yeah. And what's so nice is now that we've done 4 years, hopefully going on 5 years of full funding, is we have to ask every year because the second you stop asking, it's very easy to be forgotten. Yep. So we ask every year. And also, it's proven. It's a proven, strong program that's doing great stuff. So getting the bill reauthorized is so critical. Now, we are really starting to build momentum now. So we have close to 60 co-sponsors in the House right now. We're getting closer to the 30 co-sponsor in the Senate mark. And it just has wild bipartisan support again. So the same sponsors of the bill 4 years ago are the sponsors again this go around. So purely bipartisan, bicameral, everybody seems to love it. It's just a question of finding the time to get it done. And we're still slowly, but now more rapidly, kind of building that momentum to get it hopefully across the finish line before the end of the year.
I think it will. I mean, especially when you have a bill that's bipartisan, bicameral, it's proven to be, the efficacies have been proven. Yeah. They see the benefit of it. Right. Right. But there's still a lot of work to be done to get it done.
Right, just to make sure it doesn't get forgotten about. And that's the big thing is it's so successful and so popular. I think sometimes there can be an element of assuming it'll happen. Yeah. And that's the piece that
who dropped the ball? Who did?
Exactly, right. And
who didn't push send?
Right, and certainly, there have been other cases, for cancer and otherwise where that happens and programs kind of languish because of it. And so because this is so popular and so successful, we don't want that to be the case for us. And so that's kind of right now the thing that sometimes keeps me up at night is making sure we're not forgotten about. But we're making really good progress, and I'm very hopeful. And it's just a question of what happens between now and December 31st.
Well, my bet's on you.
Thank you.
That's going to get done.
Hopefully.
So post-COVID, it's been a lot. What's the climate like for health-related, advocacy and policy change? Do you find it's harder to get things passed and gain support of stakeholders?
Yeah, it's interesting because certainly in healthcare, understandably and rightfully so, the pandemic was the focus for so long because it needed to be. And I think the kind of temperature right now is people on some level, while acknowledging there are still health risks, are ready to think a little more forward in what comes next and what we can do together and to stop thinking about the immediate need of the pandemic. And so for something like the STAR Act, for example, that's hopefully an easy thing just to kind of, get done really quickly. But in general, I think there's definitely an appetite to kind of get back to how things were a little bit before and to, be together again and to think through a little more kind of forward-looking policy in healthcare and otherwise. There is a little healthcare policy fatigue in general, but for things like childhood cancer, quite frankly, that's never really impacted us much because the cause is so clear and the need is so great. And so I'm less worried about that from our standpoint. More broadly and broader healthcare things, there's a little kind of languishing appetite for certain things, but I think we're in a decent spot for us.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
To go, okay, I like where we're at.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't always happen.
No, and I think
sometimes you're like, oh gosh.
Yeah, no, totally. And the thing is all it takes is, one person who has a very specific personal story about this. It's how can you say no to that? Like, it is like...
Oh, they can.
I know. And
you just keep going back.
Exactly, right. You keep going back.
Squeaky wheel.
Yeah, no, totally.
I'm squeaky. Yeah.
It's perfect. Yeah. And, you know, and that's the type of thing, too. It's like, you know, if you're squeaky for long enough, then you definitely won't be forgotten about in this case. And also, like, because it's so personal to drive somebody here in the first place, like, of course you're going to keep going back. Yeah. Like, you know, nobody's giving up. So,
yeah. Okay. Your point about earlier. So I am from California. Mm-hmm. And I won't name who my, that I was a constituent of. But, you know, 10, 15, 20, all these trips later, you know, going in, it took a few till they realize I'm in it for the haul. Yeah. Like, you know, I'm going to keep coming back. And you almost, and this would be like, I guess, some advice for the new ones, the new advocates. When you're a constituent, you meet your representative, and you do form a relationship, and that takes coming back. That's not a one-time thing. Yeah. They start forming respect for you, and you start forming respect for them, because then they'll really start to listen to you. Mm-hmm. You realize they're not going to earmark. You go in and say, fund childhood cancer, heck with every other cause. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. But then when you realize, okay, so what is near and dear to me is I have never once in 30 times gone and said, can we have more chemo and radiation? It's never happened, and I will never ask for more of that. What's on my heart is funding more research for regenerative medicine, the CAR-Ts, the integrative therapy, the stem cell research, that mm-hmm. kind of thing where we're getting the more effective, less toxic cures. So that is near and dear to me, and educating them, mm-hmm. you know, on your constituents want this. Yeah. This cannot just help childhood cancer. It can help all these other mm-hmm. things. So it's educating our advocates too on what can be helpful to when you're presenting your ask, things like that, you know, that kind of thing. And so you know, for advocates out there, and that's why I love that you were talking about before about, you know, making sure they're prepared and No, and that's exactly, and that's part of what I view kind of my role as is, you know, you have so many people coming at this from so many personal perspectives, and how can we get people all on the same mm-hmm. page of kind of funneling that passion into like a specific end goal. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's, you know, how do we get it to getting a new co-sponsor for the Childhood Cancer Star Reauthorization Act? How do we get it to getting somebody else to agree to support funding for the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative, and harnessing those stories and that passion into like what the tangible piece is that fits in with the other you know, activities going on Capitol Hill, so that way we can be really effective in getting things done. And how to ask. Yes, and how to ask nicely. How to ask nicely. But forcefully. Because let's go back. We've got the ones you love, and it's a total kumbaya moment, guys. I mean, it's just it is. It's fun. Mm-hmm. And then you have the ones that you just are like, how do you not get this? But anyway. There's both. Yes. So predictions for, you know, childhood cancer research, regarding funding and advocacy. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all hope there's a cure. Yeah. This is a rough road for so many families, for so many children, for so many, you know, parents. It's a dark tunnel, you know, and stuff isn't happening as fast as we hope, but it is, there's progression, and there keeps being progression. So what can we hope to see happen? You don't have a crystal ball, but like what stuff do you see coming down the pike that you're really excited about? Yeah, and I think this is a really exciting time too, because I think from the advocacy side, the last like 5 to 7 years, a lot has happened, and there's been, you know, new legislation, there's been new funding, and it kind of took childhood cancer research from kind of more of a kind of plateau status quo to seeing investments grow from the federal government, new programs, things like that. And while those research investments take time to have their true impact, we're kind of just on the precipice of what that could look like. So, for example, I was at this briefing yesterday on Capitol Hill about childhood cancer, talking about the Childhood Cancer Star Act, mm-hmm. and 31 survivorship grants have been funded because of STAR. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's amazing. It's amazing. It's close to $25 million in new funding just for survivorship research. And like, that's amazing. And also it's new research. So mm-hmm. it's going to take some time to be mm-hmm. really fruitful and to lead to something exciting. But we're right at the start now. Yeah. And things like, you know, the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative, you know, 6 months ago, it was, you know, while still kind of building its skeleton and getting underway, is still a bit of an abstract idea. Now there are kids enrolling on trials because of it and having their cancer sequenced, and treatment decisions are being impacted by whole genome sequencing because of CCDI. And so suddenly, like, we're right at like the precipice of these
cool things happening because of policy achievements in the last few years. And so I can't wait to see what comes from that, because to me, it's just so exciting.
It is so exciting.
Of what's to come. And so, my hope and my prediction is that we can keep going, and that, getting STAR reauthorized, seeing, kind of the end result of those cool programs that STAR created, that the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative created, seeing new funding overall from the National Cancer Institute, because there's more excitement in childhood cancer research in general, somewhat because of some of these policy victories. Like, they're making bigger investments now than they ever have, and have nearly or more than doubled their funding for childhood cancer research in the last 5-7 years, which is remarkable.
That's so amazing. Crazy.
I know.
I mean, it is exciting.
It is.
And it's just because of work that you're doing, and just the collaboration of all the people who drag their fannies to DC. Who,
exactly.
I do feel like I'm glad, that people are going to start to be able to hit the hill again, because, it's like anything. I think it's just more effective when you're there live.
Yeah.
Versus seeing it on a little screen, that kind of thing, even though it is effort, So, what advice would you give your childhood cancer supporters? Like the ones, let's give them a tangible, what is your ask to them? Like regarding joining your advocacy efforts, regarding what can they do? Not everybody can come to DC.
Yeah.
So here's your plug.
No.
What do you want to ask?
Certainly, no, and I appreciate that. So St. Baldricks has a wonderful network of advocates, Start to Speak Up Network, and if you just go to stbaldricks.org/advocacy, you can find it very easily to sign up. And we try to make it as accessible as possible for wherever you are in your kind of advocacy journey. If you just want to send an email to your members of Congress, we have that totally set up for you to do that.
I was just gonna ask you.
Yeah.
So you can do that from your computer.
Exactly, and it takes 3 minutes. You can tweet at your member of Congress. That takes 20 seconds, and that makes a huge difference. If you want to come to DC, we're hoping late March, early April for Action Days. We'd love to have you. And then there's stuff in between too. Of if you see something on social media, somebody else is posting of promoting what they're sharing, especially if it's advocacy related. Paying attention to the events going on in DC in general. So watching some of these events that happen live, seeing what the National Cancer Institute is up to, things like that, to just kind of better educate yourself onto what's going on. Mm-hmm. And then when those opportunities are ripe for advocate engagement, take advantage of it. So, but ultimately you can do it from the comfort of your couch to getting on a plane and coming to DC, and we'll gladly take you. Yeah. Yeah.
And remember, you guys, your constituents want to be reelected. Mm-hmm. Your representatives want to be reelected. They want to know what their constituents want. And I'm not saying that's why they will, listen to an ask or back a bill, but at the same time, someone is coming to them pretty much every day with an ask for every single medical thing, whatever imaginable.
Yeah.
So they want to know what matters to their constituents. So when you get your voice heard, and what I love about St. Baldricks too is you can go to their website and find out how you can email, how you can, give that information to where they can do that. Yeah. You'll know, okay, here's how I look up what my representative is, because I don't even know who it is, or, whatever that is, how you can do that. And then they will get it and go, oh, okay, this matters to my constituents. And that's really, really important, because just like anything, there's power in numbers. When they're getting emails from the people that they work for, and they're realizing, wow, this really matters to them, then I need to listen to this. I need to, I need to see what I can do to make this happen.
No, absolutely. And it's one thing for me as kind of a DC area local to go into any congressional office as the representative of the organization to say this is important. It's another thing when it's someone from home who lives in their district, who, shops at the same grocery store as them, whose kids, went to the same elementary school, whatever it may be. Yeah. It makes it way more personal and way more connected to the members of Congress and to their lived experience. And that's how they start to get it a little bit better, where it moves beyond just the facts of it and more into the lived experience. And that's really where we start building champions and getting people really engaged in the issue.
All that is so important. I want to encourage everybody to check out St. Baldricks. just all of the bits of advice as far as how people can get involved and go to St. Baldrick website, and whether it be emailing your senator and representative or coming to DC. It's all depending on what your time frame is and what your availability is. All of it can be done. Anybody can send an email. Mm-hmm. And don't think it's not impactful, because it is. So, any last words before we?
No, just I think that is the best part about being an advocate is you can do what suits you best. Mm-hmm. And so,
exactly.
Organizations like St. Baldricks, we're here to help guide you on your journey for that and what feels fulfilling to you. If you want to do a lot of stuff, we're glad to help figure that out with you. If you are up for just sending, the occasional email, that's great too. We'd love to still have you engaged in that. And so there's a lot of exciting things going on, especially right now. And anybody who wants to lend their voice can absolutely be an advocate. And we'd love to have you.
You can shave your head, or you don't have to.
Exactly.
Which is, if you go to their website, you'll. Yes. That wasn't my thing that I wanted to do, but I did other stuff. So I want to encourage everybody to visit St. Baldrick's Foundation. They're the real deal. I mean, there's some foundations that I probably wouldn't endorse quite as heartily as St. Baldrick's, but I really do, because I have hit the hill with Kathleen. I don't know how many times. I mean, she just like you, you're in it for the right reasons. You are doing everything you can to make a difference and to find cures for these kids that need them, and for their survivability, all of that. And so I really, from my heart, appreciate everything you're doing, having lost a child to cancer, and seeing just on a daily basis the ones, even the survivors, what they're going through. Mm-hmm. I'm not kidding how much I tell you when I tell you I appreciate your work, and I know it's tireless sometimes, but it's also impactful, and you're making a difference. So thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for being here today. And you guys, just for all you're going to do, however you can help. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We're not going anywhere. We need your help, and we will continue to need your help. So I appreciate you being here. And I guess that's it. Until next time, thank you for joining us on Rush Podcast.